I am very pleased to welcome you to the third webinar of our fundamental series. I am sharing my screen already, so I'm assuming you can see it. First, we'll take a quick look at the presentation. We have an express webinar today. I'll get started right away. I don't want to waste much time. Today, as previously mentioned, we will have the third part of our fundamental series. This covers how to use the timesheet in timeSensor Legal 365. My name is Zoe Schiewek. Hello, everyone. I will be hosting and facilitating today's webinar session. As an account manager, I'm currently responsible for overseeing the German-speaking part of Switzerland, as well as Germany. First, we will carefully take a look together at an introduction to the timesheet, exploring its basics in detail. Let's start off with a review of the timesheet options. We will familiarize ourselves with the timesheet functionalities and then see how to work with the timesheet. In agenda item, working with the timesheet, we will see how to enter services in the timesheet. In the third item on the agenda, we will take a careful look at some helpful tips and suggestions. These can be extremely helpful and useful, especially when you are modifying or deleting services. All right, now let's take a moment and get started together. I will now just conclude my presentation. As you can clearly see, I am already logged into timeSensor Legal 465 right now. As we are dealing with the timesheet today, I will go to the personal area of the clerks. We can see from the initials in the top left corner that I am logged in as Ms. Monika Muster. If I click on my initials, my personal timesheet opens. This is important information. This is how my timesheet opens. Please mind the name in the header. Here, for example, it says timesheet of Monika Muster. If I click on the timesheet in my personal caseworker area, my own timesheet will also open. Find the caseworker's personal area at top left bar. The function bar at the top adapts to my personal workspace. And when I click on the timesheet, it opens my timesheet. A difference becomes clear when, for example, I select Mr. Sample. Now we are in his personal workspace. I click on the timesheet and we see this is Simon Sample's timesheet. That's an important difference. We have the option to record work hours both in our own timesheet and in the timesheets of other employees or colleagues. First, let's take a look at Ms. Monika Muster's timesheet and examine it in a bit more detail. We'll start on the left side here. We simply have a calendar on the left side. We can easily navigate through the days. If I want to go back to today, I just click on the Today button and it will bring me back to the current date. Mate 1 is displayed today at the top. This is very easy to handle. You have the option to easily navigate using the arrow keys if you prefer. Here I'm able to configure and adjust the display of the timesheet. Here I can choose if I want to see the current day, week, month, or entire year. This function is directly related to the function just below, the sum function. Let's take a look at an example. Conveniently, today is Friday. I can set it to see my weekly performance. Ms. Muster is on vacation, so she didn't enter anything. However, if there are entries for services, Ms. Muster could simply sum up the services at the bottom using the sum function. There are options available to sum up all services, only the billable services or only the billable time as needed. Here I can use my timesheet to create and generate a detailed report on the hours I have worked for my entries. At the bottom right, next to the sum function, there's an action menu. If I haven't selected a service, no action is available. Therefore, I need to select a service for which I want to choose an action. We'll discuss this point again at a later time. I'm showing it at the start for a specific reason. Now let's take a look at the left side. What we see here is in fact always the last mandate we selected. Here is the specific mandate document that we last opened or clicked on in this list. For example, if I have opened a dossier, gather detailed information about a client there, and then navigate to my timesheet, the previously opened dossier will still be displayed here. This is very important information to keep in mind and remember. It's quite similar to the quick drop box. In this way, I am able to conveniently save important documents directly into the client's archive. When comparing the two, we can see that it is the same mandate. timeSensor consistently and reliably remembers exactly which mandate I have worked on or the one I want to enter. A very practical feature, I would say, in my opinion. At this point in time, you already know how the timesheet works. Let's take a look at more functionalities in the timesheet. I showed that when we select a data record via the action menu, we have the option to apply an action. Now, at this moment, we are going to record a service. A service turns blue as soon as it is actually selected by the user. If I right-click the column header, I can configure columns. Here I can configure which columns are displayed to me. This is relevant in this context because the text that appears in the service column will also appear on the invoice. This will be shown in the details on the invoice. Entries in the details column are internal. If I have recorded a service and want to leave a note specifically about this service for my colleague who handles the follow-up for these tasks or this service, I would enter this in the details column. For example, please round to 6 minutes, or please round to 1 hour, or please round down. I would enter such information here if necessary. Please note, this information will then not appear on the invoice. It is possible to display this column on the invoice as well. By default, this is not the case. The column output matters when entering a time span. For further information, contact our hotline. Before we enter our very first service, let's just take a look at the toolbar together right now. There we find more options for us to choose from. I will now demonstrate all of them. We take a look at the tools and examine in detail the functions that are hidden behind them. We will also take a closer look at performance processing in the timesheet. This process includes, among other things, the important adjust function. With this option, we can generate an external timesheet in Excel format. I don't need to copy all the services for this. I just need to use the function provided by timeSensor Legal 365. So this is very possible. I could also do that. But I could also simply click here on Generate External Timesheet and thereby tell timeSensor to please initiate an export of this timesheet. The process also works the other way around, in fact. With the help of this function, for example, pre-existing timesheets can be transferred into timeSensor Legal 365. This is especially useful during the commissioning of the timeSensor Legal 365 software, as it allows for a smooth and efficient migration of timesheet data into the new system. The option for this exists right here. Below there is also a yearly calendar. When I open this, I am taken to the calendar overview. Here there's also a summary of time and vacation balances as well. This shows the difference between the assigned work schedules, my working time quota, and the hours that I have actually worked in total. For Ms. Muster, clicking on this is not possible because I received the message that no work schedule is defined for Ms. Muster. We can review that with another employee. When I click here, I get the mentioned difference and can see how much vacation I still have left for this year or this month, or how much flexi time. That's the situation here. Currently, we want to record a service in our application step by step. There are several types of benefits. There are some billable services. This is usually the most common service. This service is passed on to our clients as a normal charge. There are non-billable services, including peripheral or similar services. These are things you don't want to see appear on the bill. You shouldn't invoice these. You should record the work done since you worked. There are simply services invoiced elsewhere. This means these are services that are frequently billed, but not as they are recorded in the timesheet and not in the same way as in this service. An example case of this could be that we are assisting a client who lives a bit farther away from our firm, and we regularly have appointments there, which means a lot of travel time is involved. Agree on a flat rate amount to cover travel expenses, a flat fee. Here's a practical example. I have to consistently and accurately record my travel time each and every day, as the timesheet serves as the basis for evaluating performance statistics. Accordingly, every working hour must absolutely and clearly be recorded in the timesheet. It will not be included in the statistics. This is important. For more information, visit us online. Therefore, it can happen that I record services in the timesheet, or have to because they are relevant for billing. I may want to edit these services later. This is exactly where our example would in fact come into play. We could then assign a particular service which is to be invoiced separately to a lump sum invoice that we use to settle travel expenses, for instance. Another type of service is overproductive services. Overproductive services are often created specifically in the context of performance reworking. For example, if I have performed a service for 30 minutes, I enter 30 minutes into my timesheet. If I want this service to be billed as a 1-hour service, I change this in the dossier. The difference appears as overproductive in the timesheet. these 30 minutes in total will be billed, and therefore they must be entered. This happens at post-processing. The service is entered as usual in the timesheet, since you spent 30 minutes on this case. Then during post-processing, we round up the service to an hour, which then affects the timesheet in turn. As a result, we find that there is specifically about half an hour of overproductive time in the timesheet. It all sounds a bit complex, but it's actually quite simple. You can see all this and much more by visiting our official website today. I would like to show you, in this article, you have a comprehensive overview of the most common icons that we typically use. For example, these icons include all the different types of services that I have listed directly in the upper box. Please take your time to look at this, review the different types of services, and then working with the timesheet should no longer be a problem. I have announced several times that we will record a service. Now that's exactly what we're doing. To do this, we will look at various ways we can record work entries in the timesheet. As you can see, the process is always the same, but we can do this quickly or slowly. On the one hand, if we want to record a new service, we can click on the plus sign down here, and we will see the most recently saved mandate. This is also listed here. Alternatively, I could also select a different mandate or a different client using this small arrow, so I can configure this as I like. A second alternative, I delete this item, I select the column and click on the minus sign. There is a second method that is generally faster than the first approach. To do this, I click into the column, then use the tab key to move from one cell to the next. I then enter the shortcut of my choosing to enter the traveling time for the mandate. By pressing the tab key in the code column without entering anything, timeSensor Legal 365 will give a selection of all available shortcodes currently available in the timesheet. In my example, I would now like to record a simple service for an offsite appointment. In this case, that would be a fee-based service, which I call an appointment. Of course, you can decide what to enter here. I don't want to provide any more details. For me, this service is fine as it is. At this point, I could now simply press the tab key to continue navigating. In the columns at the back, I can easily adjust the quantity or specify an individual price for the service. The price shown here is calculated based on the price list that is stored in the system, or if such a list is available from the individual prices that have been specifically set for the mandate. If you need to adjust the amount of time is the unit in this case, another example would be kilometers. You may do so in the unit column. That's a bit difficult because usually if you've studied mathematics, you don't work with the software. Therefore, we've reserved the right to offer in most cases a simple solution for this. Enter the time in the abbreviation column after the abbreviation. For example, I can enter 2 hours here. Then I press enter to confirm the entry. Confirming the entry is extremely important. It will not be saved if this is not done. Now I can see the 2-hour entry. Time calculations, on the other hand, are a little bit more difficult. A lawyer may have spent 1 hour and 12 minutes in the meeting. As a second alternative option, a time span can be recorded. For example, since I am not always able to calculate exactly to the minute how long an appointment lasted, I could specify here, for example, that my meeting started at 11 o'clock. I enter 11:0 with a dash after it, and then the next time I checked the clock was when I left the building at 2:33 p.m. So I enter that as well. If I now confirm with the enter key, we see that timeSensor has not only calculated the correct number for me here and in the correct units hours, but I also have an output here in the detail field regarding the time span. I mentioned that a moment ago. This is relevant for us if we want to display these on the invoice. Then we can adjust the invoice template and also output the time periods as well. There are several additional ways to enter information aside from the basic methods. For example, if we had an appointment, we often want to make sure to log it as an entire process. In our example, I'll show you how to enter a trip that is taken by car. First, I would need to enter the mileage expenses. Let's say I drove about 60 kilometers. Then I had an appointment that lasted for a total of 3 hours and 12 minutes. And after this rather lengthy appointment, I went to have lunch. For the lunch, I enter expenses as usual. Afterwards, I chose to drive back home because I really value the comfort of sleeping in my own bed at night. So I enter an extra 60 kilometers of travel distance to account for the return trip home. Now I press the Enter key on my keyboard to confirm and proceed with the process. The calculation is carried out in timeSensor Legal 365 based on the criteria I set in the price settings. I can also customize this individually so that they are reimbursed at 89 cents per kilometer. Route recorded twice, outbound and return. Here I see my entry for lunch right here. There, instead of entering expenses, I can specifically enter lunch and continue navigating through the fields with the tab key. Since the quantity is just one, I only had a single lunch, not 20 lunches. I want to enter that I paid 20 Swiss francs for it. This will be transferred into the total column at the bottom. Now we have recorded various services and have learned how we can enter them in a variety of different ways. The services have been carefully recorded in the system. Often before these services can be invoiced, they need to be reviewed and processed to ensure accuracy. There is an automated task that during the night, when no one is working in the office, retrieves these recorded services from the timesheet and then transfers them into the appropriate dossier for further handling. Once these services are transferred to the dossier, they can't be edited in the timesheet. That is also intended, but it is not actually the case in every instance. However, you should remember this. So this is the direction of transfer. It goes from the timesheet, the time tracking basis, which is relevant for statistics, to the dossier, where the services can then be prepared for billing. There are a few scenarios where this has a feedback effect, for example, for instance, if I double a time period in the dossier. Remember the example we discussed earlier of a 30-minute service that is invoiced and billed as a 1-hour service? In this particular case, there would be feedback to the timesheet. In this case, I would have, for example, a 30-minute overproductive performance in my timesheet. I mentioned that usually the task retrieves services overnight. There is also a manual transfer option for services from the timesheet to the dossier. By selecting a timesheet entry above the context menu below changes, by selecting a service in the timesheet, I change the options here to be able to directly jump to open the dossier and specifically the mandate I entered the service on. I have the option to simply open the client file or to consolidate these two services. That means combining the two together. To consolidate two services, they must first both initially belong to the same service group. In this particular case, both must be either a fee-based service or alternatively, both must be an expense-based service, and they must have been recorded by the same caseworker. Here, all of the services are from Monika Muster, so this is not an issue at all. In the dossier, you should carefully pay attention to who recorded the services. If I now want to transfer such a performance into the dossier, I simply click on the Tools tab, which is located at the top of the screen. From there, I carefully select the Customize option to continue with the process. Adjust is a very important option because here, for example, we can change a non-billable service back to billable. We can set the service to non-billable. We can recalculate the price. Recalculating the price means that, for example, if after recording my service, a different price list has been assigned to the mandate. For example, we may have discussed with a client to charge at a higher or lower hourly rate. We have applied a different price list, and then using this option, I could recalculate the prices I have specified here based on the newly stored price list. So that's what's behind it. Here, I can also manually initiate or trigger the transfer task if necessary at any time. When you click Transfer to Dossier, you see the icon behind the service change. When I try to delete this performance here, we see that nothing happens anymore. This is important information, so please note this. When services are transferred, we edit them in the dossier, not timesheet. If, for example, I still want to delete this appointment, I could only do that in the dossier. I could open the case folder as well, but the services will be in the dossier. I would modify this task in the dossier, and I could, for example, select all 3 services that are listed here. Depending on what I want to do, I click, for instance, on the minus sign, and here I get the option to set the service as non-billable or as billed elsewhere, depending on the specific requirements. We have encountered these two and their meaning before. I'm just clicking here, right here, not billable. Just a moment. The services are non-billable now. Let's take a look at what happened in the timesheet now. A feedback is on the timesheet for this case. These services are also not billable in the timesheet. The services are shown in the dossier. They are now hidden under this small cross symbol, and these non-billable services no longer have the gray check mark. They are not only transferred, but also non-billable, with the special feature that if I now click on the minus, the service will in fact be deleted. Delete transferred service from dossier. That is extremely important. I can carry out this process with the services of all employees involved. For instance, in some situations, we do not want to bill a particular service exactly as it was entered in the timesheet. The mileage expenses in these cases are billed via a flat rate invoice. We close Ms. Master's timesheet and take a look at Mr. Sample's timesheet. Here we see that Mr. Sample had already arrived the evening before the scheduled appointment. He recorded this information yesterday, and by accident he actually did so twice in error. In the first step, we want to delete one of the services. Since the service has already been transferred to the dossier, clicking on the minus button below will not work here. The service is in the client's dossier now, so the first thing we have to do is open it. And we can see that Mr. Sample's entry is displayed here. We want to delete one of these services, so we set it to not billable. As we can see, it is now not billable. Now we can simply delete them. The second entry he recorded refers to actual working time. This is a fee-based service. We cannot simply delete the entries for statistical reasons. However, since we do not wish to invoice them either, we require a different option of modification. Let's take a closer look at an example of this using a service. We'll use the journey service entry to see how to deal with this situation. I'm closing this window to save and refresh. This is the service that we would like to continue working on. When we click on the minus here on the interface, we are prompted to select the type of service and choose invoiced elsewhere. We confirm that in this case, we can see our entry is displayed after clicking the X, and that feedback to the timesheet has occurred in this instance. Here too, the service is officially declared as invoiced elsewhere. Here we see a collective invoice for travel expenses, which is shown here. So it's easy for us to simply select this service and then correct the invoice assignment. With that, we have now successfully assigned this particular service. The duplicate entry, as you can see, has been deleted. We have resolved the case and have changed the service type to a service billed elsewhere. It will no longer appear on an invoice, but it is still assigned to that invoice. It is now linked with the lump sum invoice we issued. I'll close the window for you, and we'll take a look at Ms. Monica Master's timesheet. Now, what we want to do here is modify the amount of time entered for this service. For example, we have a nice standard fee right here. I'd like to demonstrate the overproductive performance. We open the file, in this case for review, and as usual, see the fee service from Ms. Master. Most of the time, it really won't be the case that we'll not be billing our clients for a service time of 3 hours and 12 minutes. That is not a good entry to be seen on an invoice. So instead, we would usually round it up to a much nicer number. In this case, I could easily correct the working time, and I want to round the time t up to exactly 3 hours and 30 minutes, ensuring the adjustment is accurate. In this case, I don't want to allocate the service elsewhere. Instead, I want to record it as overproductive output. I confirm the modification. We can see working hours change. The difference in time between the original entry and the rounded entry is displayed in the timesheet as an overproductive service for statistical reasons. Let's take a look at what happened in the timesheet. So now we're introduced to another symbol. It looks a bit like the non-billable symbol, but it's green. Green stands for overproductive services, while gray stands for non-billable services. A gray checkmark indicates services that have already been transferred to the dossier. If this checkmark turns red, it means that the service is already included in an invoice data record.